All right. Give everybody a couple minutes to get back. Meantime,
Ready to rumble.
All right, let's do it. My chair keeps getting smaller and smaller.
Oh.
Time for a new chair. Oh man, all right. So as everybody starts coming back, there are a bunch of ways to connect to me, right, if you're interested, right? So myitinstructor.com, it's kind of where I put all my random stuff related to this and work. And when I say work, I mean the work I get paid for, my day-to-day job, which is teaching computer information systems. So we have, there's also my students from Hackerspace have a bunch of stuff up here, and then robotics resources, and then our Pi Wars blogs for the team for the first 5 years or so. There's us. The first year we went, some pretty cool stuff. But if and I think there's it should pop up with a newsletter sign up. So understand that I'm a one-man show and I'm not a web guy, so it'll be kind of half and half. You'll get things here and there, but it's one way to keep in contact with me. It's on the web page. Nice. And then second is I do have a YouTube channel. So a lot of these kind of workshops end up getting posted there. So my networking workshops, hands-on workshops, installation of PL app, things like that, those are all going to show up. And then we do a lot of the robotic stuff will show up there. And then I do a lot of content that I put into, I kind of hide them. By what I mean by that is I don't list them, but like a lot of my labs that I do for my server classes and stuff like that. So if there's content out there that you're interested in taking a look at, follow me on YouTube. And that's actually probably the most where I post most everything I do. The most stuff that gets posted there, because I try to do it for my classes and then I save all that stuff. So, and there's a lot of like a Raspberry Pi IoT stuff out there as well. So, so that's another place for you to connect with me. You can also connect with me on Instagram. Right. I'm only showing you my work-related ones. So my IT instructor. So we post, just kind of interesting things that we're working on. That one's not as active as I want it to be, but we're working on it. And LinkedIn, right? So you can find me on LinkedIn as well, right? So usually you search my name or my email address, like kbruce@cnm should show up as one of those. But those are different ways to connect with me. Again, completely if you want to or not. I basically just kind of share contents, and goof around and have fun with it. So I feel fortunate to have a job where they pay me to talk about things that I'm passionate about. And in WotC's the same way, they let me talk about things I'm passionate about, and you guys get to hang out with me. So and I get to hang out with you, which I think is totally awesome. If anybody lives in the Dallas area, I'm going to be out there in July. And then the next week I'm going to be out in Pittsburgh. I don't know if anybody lives near Pittsburgh. I've never been to Pittsburgh. But I'm heading out to Pittsburgh. I think, where am I going to be? In Frisco, Texas, July 11th through the 15th. And then I will be in Pittsburgh from the 17th through like the 25th. So if you're out there and you want to hang out and get coffee or grab a beer, hot dog, whatever. So I already scheduled to go to the baseball games. So Beer and hot dogs seems to be the theme when you do those kind of things. Yeah, so those are the ways to connect to me if you're interested. Obviously, you guys probably have my email address. If not, it's kbruce, KBRUCE @cnm.edu. That's my work address. And then, or it's Kerry, KERRY @myitinstructor.com. And like I said earlier, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions on any of this stuff. I did see a question on the parking lot that I'd like to go ahead and address right off the bat. So I am recording and I'm sharing my screen, right? Or am I not? I am. Okay. You can see this? Yes, in the chat is good. Awesome. Thanks, Heidi. So right here in the middle, Netiquette has no plans for the new IoT course. So what are you considering? Let me show you what I've done. So we use Brightspace. I don't know if you guys have heard of Brightspace. So what I did, let's find the spring course. So I took, if you've taken the IoT Connecting Things course with me, you know I added a ton of extra material to the pile. At this point, this course, I basically took the course and rebuilt it into Brightspace. And I kind of went with a couple of themes, right? Introduction to Internet of Things, fun with microcontrollers, getting started with single board computing, physical computing, internet connectivity, and then putting it all together in the final project. So it basically kind of reworked the whole thing. If we go, and all of this, like if there's any pieces here that you want me to share, more than happy to share. I don't know if, I think I can do a course export if you have Brightspace. I'm not sure how that works with Brightspace at this point. But I just want to kind of share kind of what I've done in order to work through this. Essentially, I still use the chapter work, the chapter like the reading material and the quizzes in Cisco. And then we set up the PL app, and then we do the chapter 5 earthquake alarm lab, and we do the chapter 6 Google Calendar sunrise sunset, which we've already done that outside of the PL app. So I know we can recreate that outside the PL app. So really at this point, I only have to come up with a way to duplicate or replace the database, the MongoDB earthquake lab. Otherwise, all of the labs, I'm using similar open source content, right? So, and if you haven't gotten that idea, I use web resources left and right. I'm not a big fan of recreating the wheel. I probably can make a whole lot more money if I put it all together myself. That's not the point. This is, I mean, I want to share all these things with you. So, so basically what we created was like we did as learning objectives. So this is actually, I'm trying to look for the overview and syllabus. So we got course competencies. So we built course competencies for this, and then I have actually sub learning objectives. So we spent a lot of time taking what Cisco had and what I had already kind of embellished with, and then we created these learning objectives around that. So the course competencies, right? Those are kind of we call them CLOs, right? The course level competencies, they're at the top, right? And then we have the objectives, which are kind of the more student learning, where we kind of pinpoint exactly what we're going to do, right? So and you can, if you redo these, and if you've done the Connecting Things course, you can see that I basically kind of pulled out what are we trying to show you here, right? And we constructed that into a, right, this whole kind of matching to Bloom's taxonomy and and getting this course. This course isn't QM certified, but it is well on its way to do that if we wanted to move that direction. So that's kind of the idea here, is we're trying to follow this process. So we, instead of having, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, I kind of broke it down into kind of what are the topics that we're doing, right? So we're introducing, we're going to fun with microcontrollers, right? That's just that chapter 2 in the connecting things course. And if we go look at, for example, we look at that one, right, and we kind of pinpoint, here's the things we're going to learn. And then I have them read. So there's an assignment in here to read, right? Here's the link out to Neticat, do your stuff in Neticat. And then I have to actually go and bring over the grade, which is kind of a pain. But that's, I only have to do that 6 times, so it's not a big deal. I provided PowerPoint, and then what I did is we have O'Reilly. If you had stuff with me before, I was using Automate the Boring Stuff. I think you guys have heard of that. Automate the Boring Stuff. I think this is not the second edition. This is the first edition. There's a second edition. I don't know. I think there's a link out to the second edition at some point, but this is a free online book, right? That covers a lot of really good topics. And I really like the book, and I've used it for a long time. But go ahead.
No, sorry, don't worry about that. I was
no
talking
worries.
to my child.
Oh, that happens. my kid, which my youngest is 22, and she slipped a note under the door. Hey, I'm going to go to go to Emily's, her sister's. Like, dude, you don't need to tell me that. I'm okay. My wife is off helping with her parents out of town, so then she just wants to let me know. But I think, yeah, if you get interrupted, you get interrupted. It's okay. Anyways, so this is really good. Like, I think it's really good content. However, what I was finding was it's a lot of work. Like, there's a lot of stuff going, to get into it. And yes, I think I'm not afraid of work. And I really tell my students, you gotta, if you want to be good at this, you got to do a lot of it. You got to put in the effort. I don't think this is any different. Like, being good at IT is any different than, say, being good at tennis or soccer or basketball or whatever. You have to put in the time and the training to be good at it. It's not something that you're going to pick up right away. And I think, and I don't know if you've seen this with your students, but I've seen it with my kids, and I've seen it with my grandkids. And maybe there's a prevailing attitude, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I've seen is a lot of folks, if they aren't good at it right away, they just give up. That's not how this works. We're going to fall flat on our face, a ton of times before we even get close to being good at this. So what I did find, though, with this book,
I will say this to that point, though. It's kind of interesting you brought that up, because I'm literally reading a book right now, and the theory of the entire book is based on this concept that people aren't dedicated to things anymore because we've created in IT a consciousness of infinite browsing. And one of his theories is students today don't commit like they used to in class because they are effectively keeping their options open even when they're in class. Yeah. Like, oh, I don't want to get too deep into Python because this new programming language might come down the pike.
Right. You're like, okay. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. So I don't know. I just think it's interesting. And the only reason I'm having the conversation with you is maybe, I can act as a sounding board for that, or you can act as a sounding board for me. But the idea here is that the material here in this book is really good, right? And we used to do about 8 chapters. But what I was finding is after about the 3rd chapter, like people, students getting the work done just kind of nosedive, and then people started dropping the class. And one of the, because this class has been a labor of love for me from the very beginning, because it's to me, it's such a fun class, and it involves so many things around IT. And it was shocking for me to see people not like it and leave because there was too much work to do. Like, there was so much stuff going on, even though the material was good. So what I've done is I switched over to we have O'Reilly learning platform through our library at CNM. And there's a set of Python lessons, which are more video based, right? So you watch the video and do the exercises with the instructor. And they take less time, but they get across the concepts that we really want the students to know, so that they can then, when we're doing the exercises on the Raspberry, then they excuse me, have a base understanding. My pizza is talking to me. So I kind of shifted from that. So the IoT class that Cisco provides doesn't have Python in the class. I put Python in the class because I do not have any prereqs on this class other than the digital literacy class. And that's actually a co-req, right? So anybody in the school, as long as they do the digital literacy course, they could take this course, this IoT course. So the skills that we need, though, to do the project at the end, we're going to need some Python. So that's, every chapter has an embedded component of Python, so that by the time we get to needing that skill, it's already been taught previously, right? So we tried to build this as a scaffold to build them up to the point where they can do this on their own. But then I do, excuse me, heavy into notebook. I do notebook assignments in probably 3/4 of my classes at this point. We use Microsoft Teams and the OneNote class notebook that's there. It used to be a physical notebook, like literally show up with a composition notebook. And again, I think that's one of those professional skills in the IT field that you have to know, that you have to be comfortable with, that you have to do, right? Because in our field, you either get paid or not paid based on your documentation, right? I've had to fire people, when I own my own business, for not documenting because I wasn't able to bill for their time. And if I can't bill for your time, then I don't need you here. So we have those kind of built in too, right? So I've embellished what Cisco put together, and I've added the Python lessons, I've added the engineering notebook. And then in this case, right, I've given them resources for IDE and Arduino. And then if you look at the Cisco course, they have some labs built in the Cisco course that are basically duplicates of some of the labs out of the Tinkerkit exploration, right? So what I did instead was, let's just go do the Tinkerkit. So we have them buy a Tinkerkit or an equivalent, right? So this is what we currently have them purchase. And then I'm looking at, maybe switching over to the Pico as an alternative to this, but I have them go through all of these, right? Because I'm like, well, let's learn all of these pieces. And these are not really difficult labs. I think the hardest one is the servos or the motors. This one is with inputs. And then there was a relay lab that was built into the Cisco material, and I've created that lab. It's also a lab from SparkFun, but it's not in the Tinkerkit. It's in. I actually have a video here, but there's also I thought I had an additional. I think in the video I actually walked them through how to do the lab, where the lab is at.
I've had my class for the past 3 hours, so I apologize. I've missed a
No
bit.
worries.
I don't know if you've already covered it, but I've noticed you mentioned SparkFun and a few other places I've gone myself. What about Adafruit? Because Adafruit has that learning section.
Yeah,
that is so fantastic.
Either one is fine. The only reason I've chosen the SparkFun stuff is because that was the original Cisco kit.
Okay.
And we did cover some of that earlier, but more from the hardware perspective.
That's what I was trying to figure out, because one of our peers was talking about setting up an IoT course using the Cisco system, and they were talking about, and I wasn't aware of this. What do they call their board? Like WIC or something like that. And it kind of threw me off because I was like, why weren't they using the Raspberry Pi?
Oh, yeah. There's two pieces of it, right?
Yeah.
So there's an Arduino component, which is going to be your microcontroller analog stuff.
And then you have to have the Raspberry Pi to confer.
And then you
Okay,
have Raspberry Pi, which is going to also be, I mean, we do, I have them repeat a lot of these labs on the Raspberry Pi to see it 2 different ways.
I got it.
You have Arduino code and Python code. If I can figure out how to switch to the Pico, then I have MicroPython and Python. So they're going to be a whole lot closer to, right? We're not kind of relearning things.
You're like cross-pollinating a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
I like it.
Kind of the idea. So, so a component of the IoT class is the Arduino, right? And it's doing where we're gathering sensor data, that's the right place for a microcontroller. I shouldn't put a Raspberry Pi out at the edge collecting temperature data when I can use, say, like an ESP, I don't know, 32, right? And have that connected to a Raspberry, either Ethernet or USB or some, or serial, right? I mean, that's an option as well. And let the Raspberry Pi be the collector for all that data. And then that Raspberry Pi with Python and internet connectivity can then, like, we can start to do things with that data. Much more so than the Arduino is kind of the endpoint, right? So if the moisture at the endpoint is low, you could have the Arduino trigger and put water there. You could also have it just report that it's low and have the Raspberry trigger the water, or you can have the Arduino trigger the water and report to the Raspberry, and the Raspberry can then shard it and then share that information with, a database that you can then do analytics or whatever on. And there's all kinds of ways to combine them. So making sure that you see both in an IoT class I think is important, because they have different purposes, and they can work together, right? So the very last assignment in the Cisco curriculum is to take I want to say it's not a potentiometer, it is a light indicator. What is the word for that?
Photometer.
There you go. A photoresistor, right? That's what I was trying to get to.
Oh yeah, well,
and
I've heard photometer too, but I think resistor is the proper term. Yeah.
You connect that to the Arduino, and the Arduino then shares its data. So you turn on the Arduino and it records. It just is monitoring that device, and it tells you what the light levels are, and it sends that device that information serially to the Raspberry through a USB cable. And on the Raspberry, though, you have a program that's monitoring that input, and when the input drops below a certain threshold, that triggers an event called sunset. And then that event will then trigger an IFTTT put request, right? We're going to go put some data. And when IFTTT sees that, it then connects to Google Calendar and posts a quick event that says you sunset at X time. And then when the threshold rises above that, when the light levels rise above that threshold, then you get a sunrise event, right? So then at that point, we have the Arduino with an analog sensor connected to a Raspberry with Python programming connected to the internet, and then the internet connection connected to another internet connection. So you kind of combine all of those pieces together. This is just to get us used to these first couple assignments. How does the Arduino work? Right? How do I collect this data? This one here is how does a relay work, right? So first of all, it's for most new students, it's pretty complicated wiring. Parts can be turned in backwards. You can have the wrong part. There's a couple places, and I cover that in this video. So they have this video to walk them through this process. But this lab is a duplicate of a lab that's in the Cisco materials. So the question I'm answering is, because Cisco's retiring the IoT and there's not a follow-up at this point, what am I doing? Well, this is what I've done. So the only thing that I would have to pull out of here, right? If and when the Cisco stuff goes away, the only thing I have to replace really is this piece here, right? So then as long as I find suitable content that match that, if Cisco doesn't come up with something, then I replace that one piece, and the rest of my course continues to work, right? So to answer the direct question, I just basically created the course. I duplicated what I could, and then I created the new components. but every chapter is kind of built like this, and they just flow from top to bottom. And then I know on here, I thought, yeah, I have, I'm gonna cancel the update, but I've got videos of me doing the labs so that they can watch doing the labs, right? So they have me live doing the lab. And you'll see that this week, I do everything live. I typically don't even practice before we get started. And the reason I do that is because when we run into problems, I want the students to see me solve the problem. Because if all I ever showed them was something that worked perfect every time, then that's not really reality. So, and maybe that's the right way to do it. Maybe it's the wrong way to do it. It's just how I do it. But you can see from this, I've actually gone out and created these. You know, I did labs online. I cut the content up so that they can see these circuits. And I've either duplicated most of the stuff are like one-to-one equivalents to what was in the Cisco lab. Okay. And then trying to figure this one out. Oh, this one actually is a lab that we've pulled out of, but it's something that can be easily recreated. It's just going out to Tinkercad and creating a light circuit in a graphical form before they actually do the relay lab. So I don't know if that helps or that answers the question. But I've gone out, I spent a lot of time getting this done so that we could avoid not being able to, to teach the class. I don't know that it would be difficult to find. I don't think it would be difficult to find replacements for the reading. But I've done that for each, so I've got the Python lessons, and then I've got the installation and configuration, which is essentially a lab we're going to do today. I have them set up remote connections so they can run headless. In fact, I think I have videos on how to set it up headless, so they don't even need an extra monitor or keyboard. Again, looking at how can I get the students, especially when they're doing this at home, right? Because we had to run this class online, we had to run this live or online for 2 years. And this is a class that I feel a whole lot more comfortable doing in person. I can do it online. It's not a problem. I can do it online. I think where the struggles is I can't see the student struggling. So I don't know when to reach out, right? And then usually that ends up in frustration for the student. And then the student either just kind of, shells up and leaves, or not sure. Or they try for 6 hours to do something that I could have answered in like 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes by pointing something out. So for the time being, right, unless we get, unless we're not allowed to teach in person, I teach the IoT classes in person starting in the fall, and I teach the robotics class in person. Everything else I'm still teaching online. Okay, so that's good. Yeah, so if you have other resources, yes, please share them. If you should have access to our doc, the web links to the Google Doc, so throw it out there as well. Either place, I'll try to gather them up out of the chat if we miss it. But yeah, everything that resource-wise, web page-wise, that would help somebody build something. And what we'll do is we'll try to get it out there. We'll try to get it organized in such a way that somebody is looking for something, they can go look at the document, find a heading that makes some sense, and then they can start looking through the documents. But so I set them up so like this is more of like system admin, components versus IoT, right? So installing and configuring the Raspberry Pi OS, that's all a system admin kind of thing. Remote connectivity, right? So that you can remotely control the computer. That's a sysadmin thing. And then I have them do a conquer the command line exercise, which is just, it may be an introduction to how the bash works, how the command line on the Linux systems work. And it may be the second time they've seen it. It could potentially be the third time they've seen it, depending on when they take this course. I know we have 3 classes where they have similar content. However, I don't know when they're going to take this class, so I needed to make sure it was there. And then second of all, I know in our CIS program, for example, the topic of DNS, that's covered 4 different times, or maybe 5 times, right? And each time we add a little bit to the, right? We add a little bit, so that by the time they get done, they should have an understanding of DNS. So this will be one of those times. And then we do set up the PL app, right? So I walk through the PL app installation, and then they do some basic PL app notebook stuff. Those are done on 2 separate SD cards, right? So the PL app is Cisco's modified operating system designed to run on a Raspberry Pi. It does remote connections automatically. It's actually a Jupyter notebook. So you actually connect via a web browser to your computer. You do all your programming on your computer. You do all the programming on the Pi from your computer through a web browser. Is essentially what's going on there. So in this chapter, let's get everything set up. And that's kind of what we're going to do the rest of this afternoon is let's get a Raspberry Pi up and running so that we can then start doing things tomorrow. But so to answer the question from the Miro board, I have moved everything over into a new, and I'm more than happy to send screenshots, copy things down, send things over. I've broken it down into like the introduction where they have to do the engineering notebook. They've got to do chapter 1. They've got to do a writing assignment. We do some labs in class where I remember where I talked about like the professional skills side of things. I use Netacad. This is one place where I do use Netacad because you can create groups in Netacad. So I create groups of 2 and I create a different group for each of these labs. So at the beginning of each lab, okay, I need Liliana and Eric, right? Stand up, you're partners, right? And then they all have to kind of get up and move around, meet new people. They don't have a choice. And then at the end, usually 2 groups would present, and I use a random number generator to say which groups have to present. So it's like, do the work because you may be called. So I do that like 5 times in a class. So to me, it's really fun. To the students, a little stressful. However, I think it's something that they need to get used to. So I think that's kind of a fun battery of things that we do with that as well. So how you want to use that in your class, up to you. Again, like I said, I can share all of this. And in fact, I think we have most of this kind of stuff built into the Cisco Netacad courses. So we should be able to find a way to move that. When we had Canvas, it was easy for me to export and I could save the export. I'm not sure how to do that in the new stuff, in the Moodle stuff. And then physical computing. So we get into physical computing, same kind of thing. So each chapter, just kind of work through each chapter. So just combine what makes sense. And I've replaced, like I have the Pi Camera Fun, the Pi Stop Motion. I've got Introduction to Physical Computing. So I have them do a round full of things that are all really similar to what you would do in the Cisco class, in the Cisco labs. They're not exact, but they're close. They cover the same type of topic. And then we move on from there, right? So I don't know if that helps or hurts, but that's the idea for that class. We don't teach the data analytics course using the Raspberry Pi. We have a battery of 3 classes that uses Tableau. So we don't use the Raspberry Pi there. Again, that'd be one of those places where it'd be kind of neat to do that. From the big data and analytics course, I really want to move over the smile recognition lab. I'm going to move that over into connecting things because I think it's just a fun lab. And if it's done right, it's not, most of the coding is already there for them. So it's not like we have to write things from scratch. It'll be fun to do that as part of the camera assignment. And that would also be kind of their introduction to machine learning, which then gets them interested in machine learning and AI, which we have a new degree program for that. Plus it helps possibly bring in more students for robotics because we use the same kind of machine learning to have the robot recognize objects. Right, so I don't know, you kind of see I'm trying to tie all these things together in my courses. So as we do these courses, like I know this kind of leads to this, and I can talk about this next thing. Like, hey, if you like this, think about this and think about that. right? So that kind of that they're always thinking what's next kind of a thing, or what's going to replace this. I want to prompt them with some direction, right? So it's like herding cats. That's what I'm trying to do with that. Fair enough. We'll stop talking about that. All right, cool. But I did find that, you know, the course had gotten to the point where it was actually one of the, I had a student say, it feels like it's a weed out course. And I'm like, oh, wait, I did something wrong, right? So we've reworked it, and I provide a lot of the extra video content now. So the students are progressing through it a whole lot better, and we have far fewer folks dropping. I think it was the online component that was like, when you're online and you're trying to solve these problems at, you know, midnight, and nobody's available to help you, that becomes a problem. Yeah, so I really, you know, if you're going to do the IoT Connecting Things course, I'm a big fan of it being in person.
You know, I'm coming up on 20 years teaching now, and I can tell you that, in my opinion, it feels almost like the biggest problem we're having with students in getting lost in IT courses is the fact that we have so damn many systems. To teach a course, you need to log into your electronic book, and then you need to log into this system to do this and that to do that. It's okay for IT people to have this problem, but I do think we're not addressing the students as much as they love to talk about multitasking. It's not as easy as it sounds.
They can't. I tell you, they can't.
Right. It doesn't exist. It's been proven. Multitasking is an illusion, but they're convinced that they can do it until they don't want to.
Yeah, until you say, well, I need you to log here, do this, log here, do that. And they're like, what? Yeah. Yeah.
What class is this?
Exactly. It's so
yeah.
You're
not alone in that problem. I'll say that, Carrie.
Yeah.
How's that?
So right. I appreciate that. So what I've done is because I used to we have Brightspace is new. Like, we've only had it for like 2 years now. In fact, the same time frame that Cisco changed from Canvas to Moodle, we changed from Blackboard to Brightspace, that same December timeframe. And what I used to do is I used to, not do anything in Brightspace, just go to Cisco and do your stuff there, right? But then all your grades are back in Brightspace. Like, so then I'm like, okay, so then now I've built all my courses where it's in Brightspace. If you have a link out to another curriculum, then the link is in the assignment. Click on it, do your stuff. It automatically brings it back over, right? To kind of eliminate that confusion. But I do, and then I use Microsoft Teams as my communications tool with my class. So that's kind of thrown folks, because I know Brightspace has some communication tools, but it's not the interactive kind of thing that you get with Teams. So then they were like, now they have to balance those two items, right? And then I send announcements, and announcements come to your email. So now you have this third problem you got to go. And to me, right, part of it is like, well, if you're in IT, like, that should be a normal thing, right? But my second thought is, well, these folks aren't in IT yet. It's like, we got to get them there, so that this is kind of a normal process for them. So I've been reducing down as much as I can. I think we finally have the powers to be that they're going to actually integrate Teams into Brightspace. So then those two interfaces, I just have go to Brightspace, and everything will be, you'll be able to access everything from that one interface. So so I think that'll be really nice. But I agree with you, right? The more things we have, like, because you're like, okay, you can put the Pulse app on your phone, right? Then you need the Outlook app on your phone, so I can send you emails so that you know what's going on, and you get your announcements. And then you need, well, Signage is our online material. Oh yeah, and Signage has an app that you can put on your phone, so you can do your work there, but you can't do the labs there because, right, it's web. So yeah, I understand. It's so my big focus has been kind of to reduce that down, and then I try to provide as much detail about here's what we're learning, and here's why you're doing these assignments. Like, this is what we need to what we're trying to figure out. And I think that's helped out a ton. The other thing I've done is, like, I haven't done it with the IoT class, but I have done it with my like my IT, my A+ classes, is I provide what do we do? Summer 2, yeah, that's it. So IT Essentials hardware. So this is the same kind of thing, right? So we have these classes where we build out, and I apologize, I just want to, so a lot of this will help you just kind of understand how I think. Maybe that's not a good thing. So we build out the module. The module's based on the Signage chapter, right? Because we're going by chapters, right? So we break down, here's all the stuff you're going to learn. And then these are all links out to the content that's provided by the Cisco, by the content provider. But then except for this module, I think this module 1 video content. So what I did here was, I have students that constantly in the feedback, Signage didn't help me at all pass this test. Well, then you didn't read, right? Because if you read, like it covers like it covers 2 or 3 times as much information as you actually need. So what I did is I'm like, well, instead of kind of being a jerk about it, I'm like, well, I know that they would really prefer video content. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. Your students like video content. They think they learn as much as they do when they read. Yes, no, maybe so. So I'm like, okay, you want video content? Like I gave them, Professor Messer's missing on this one because there's no, let's go to chapter 2 because there's actually Professor Messer idea. So I'm like, well, then here's 3 different perspectives. Like literally, you can watch for every chapter, there's good 8 hours worth of content that you could watch if you wanted to, right? So provide them with the content, right? So there's, Professor Messer videos, and then we've got links out to Mike Myers videos, and we got links out to David Prost videos. And so if you teach A+, you probably know these 2 folks, right? So Professor Messer and Mike Myers, that's all they do. A+, Net+, Security+. I've been doing it forever. They teach completely different, right? This guy's a talking head and PowerPoints. This guy is kind of real jovial, and he does skits and has props and all kinds of other stuff. And then you have David Prost, who would be your stereotypical instructor, like, and I say that, because if you watch him, he works on the blackboard and he approaches it. This is the objectives that we're going to cover, and so he kind of approaches it in that kind of a format. But they all present the same exact material, but they present it a slightly different way. And I've actually had students in the follow-on class like, hey, do you have that content? Because that really helped me. And I would go back and look and say, yeah, it did help him because he crushed the final. Like he crushed the CompTIA exam. But providing it like, look, you can watch one of them, at least watch one. Like if you like, the first chapter, watch all 3, a couple of them, see which one you like the best. Then definitely, consume that content. But if you can watch all 3 and you'll do that, while you're sitting around doing nothing or playing on your phone and you're watching a video from Mike Myers instead of playing a game or watching TikTok or whatever, then okay, then I'm at least reaching you. And maybe this will sink in, but I provided these for every single module. And I'm trying to go back to all of my previous courses and do the same kind of thing. Like here's, content that's available to you. All of this content doesn't cost them anything, right? It's either provided through O'Reilly or provided on YouTube for free. So there's no extra cost to this for the students. So I'm trying to provide that same kind of thing. So I'm hoping to do the same thing with the IoT. A lot of the content is stuff that I've done. But that's, I don't know, it's just one of the ways that I think, we try to give them options, right? And I think that guy goes into the idea like, look, here's the textbook, right? And here's quizzes that you have to take, but you can read the textbook and take the quizzes, or you can watch these videos and take the quizzes. They cover the same content. So anyways, I'll get away from that, but I just think it's, I think it's a good way to do things. But that's my answer to Cisco Netiquette. I just recreated the course. And I have to, and in the next year, unless they come up with something new, and hopefully they come up with something new, and I can, and maybe even if it doesn't have labs in it, we can at least just reference to the contents, right? So if they put it in that skills for all, in fact, like the skills for all, I probably would have that introductory chapter. I'd probably have them do that introduction to IoT as part of that first chapter. So that's just content that they can get access to, and they can and learn that material. And then if Cisco does come up with some other follow-on to that in skills for all, then we'll continue to reference that material. But based on the blueprint that Cisco provided, I have, I don't want to say competing, but I have similar labs built that I maintain. So every 6 months, well, it's usually about every year, something goes awry and I've got to modify the assignment. So as soon as somebody has a problem, oh, what's going on? So we investigate it and then I rewrite the assignment. In fact, in my server class, I've rewritten the assignment while we're doing the assignments. It's kind of funny. But I don't know. I hope that answers the question. It's just a long-winded answer. I apologize. Okay. So yeah, so if you, the other thing I really want to know is, if we come back over here to this, right? I don't know if we can bold and underline those things. There's bold, okay. But from these major topics like cybersecurity, so cybersecurity, right? We're doing a class in 2 weeks on cybersecurity, so I really don't want to do something specific to cybersecurity here, right? Because then I'll just repeat it over there. But what I would like to know, and if you just want to put it as a single thing in chat, is of these topics, right? Of these topics like programming, Internet of Things, networking, gaming, system admin, cloud computing, web development, AI, computer science, of those, like maybe like list your top 3 interests, like so for projects to do. So I want to make sure that I line up for the next 2 days. Like, do we want to do, is it overwhelmingly programming projects? Do we want to do networking projects? Do we want to do, sysadmin projects, like something like that? But if you could maybe just put your top 3 in there, general, and then I will, one of my tasks tonight would be to then formulate what fits best, right? And I don't choose these ahead of time because it really depends on who's in the class, right? So if I have a lot of web development instructors and they're really interested in how to use this in a web development environment, then I'm going to go that route, right? And because that wouldn't be my first choice, because that's like, I'm not as strong in that as I am, say, in networking or sysadmin or, even kind of the programming things at the Python level. Does that make sense? So if you wouldn't mind, that way then I just get a sense, right? So there's 13 of you out there. So, right, that would be 30, 39, 30 something. I don't want to do math right now. So I get a good sense, right? So Sarah, great, right? So programming, IoT, computer science, okay? And we can, that way then I can pick projects that make sense for this group, right? So we've got networking. I don't know, I can make the colors. So I'm not gonna, yeah, so let's do, so sysadmin. So we got cloud computing, right? So web development. So we go the computer science route. I'm not a computer scientist, but we will make an attempt at it. Let's put it this way. I'm comfortable enough that I think we'll be fine. So we'll see how that goes. Those are the big things. There's AI is here. AI was on computer science. It also showed up on data science. So data science maybe. So we could, I mean, there is that facial recognition exercise. I think is really fun. That one we would have to install the PL app. So that may be another process because that could be all part of the lab, right? VPN, DNS, DHCP. All right, those are good ones. Network, sysadmin, web. I love it. Programming, robotics, VPN. That's a good one. I like robotics. IoT, networking, cybersecurity. Awesome. Much helpful. Appreciate it. Okay. Let me grab that. If you hadn't had time or you haven't come up with anything, go ahead and put it in there. I'll check later after we're done. It looks like I got programming like 4 times, it looks like. I got IoT several times. I got several networking items. Cybersecurity a couple times, robotics, sysadmin, web. I think it'd be, I mean, we can build a lamp stack and do a little web page. It'd be kind of fun. Cool. So the only gaming we've done so far, which in my networking class, when I teach the Network Plus class, I have them do all their homework at home, right? So it's definitely a flipped classroom because in the classroom, I bring in a box of Raspberry Pis and we have a discussion about a small business and what kind of things, right, they would need on a network, right? You know, available for computers and whatever. And then we take that conversation and we drill down into the infrastructure that's needed to support that network. And then we build it on the Raspberry Pis, right? So then they spend the entire, I break the students up into teams and we fire up a trouble ticketing system. I have it listed on my other page. I always forget the name of it. Spiceworks, right? So we fire up an online trouble ticket system, and then based on our conversation, I actually assign tickets. Right? So they actually get tickets. They have to document the ticket. They got to support them. They got to do the work. And then, you know, the people that are responsible for DHCP, anybody who needs an address on the network has to actually submit a ticket for the DHCP group to actually then assign them a static IP address, and then they have to go in and actually reserve that address and things like that. So we do that for the entire semester. So we try to create like an IT environment for them to that's as real as we can possibly get in a kind of in a classroom setting. And then if we get done, and we usually get done about 2 weeks before the end of the semester, we actually load up either like Unreal or Minecraft or something like that and let them go to town. So I figure if they worked hard enough to build the network and get it fully functional, connect to the internet with wireless access and all of the infrastructure components that you would need to run a network, then let's have some fun with the network. So that's typically what we end up doing. All right. So it's programming, DevOps. That would be, we may be stretching that one. We could try. All right. I like it. Okay, good. All right. Who's ready to get, oh, I just closed. I hope I didn't log out. I think I just closed it. Let me bring that back up on my other side here. Oh, it's still there. Okay. Yeah, you can keep on thumping away. If you have ideas for the parking lot or any kind of questions, if you want to just put questions on those tabbies or topics on the tabbies, and I can just anything like that that you can prompt me with that'll help me formulate, right? I wanted to make sure that the workshop was custom to the folks in the workshop. Especially because I'm not in a hotel and I'm not on travel. I can do it here at night and we can get it figured out. Okay, yes. Let us go and you will all need to do this with me. You need to go to raspberrypi.com. You should spell it correctly, not like I spell it. You need to go to the .com version, because here's where we're going to get software and things like that. Okay, so for this lab, you will need your Raspberry Pi. So we're going to go with this one. This is one I grabbed off of the bench. All right, the sun's a little bright right now. Apologize for that. You will also need an SD card reader, right? So I got a handful. It doesn't, just find one you're comfortable with, right? I kind of like this Sabrent one here. This Insignia one is pretty nice too. A couple of these. So this is what happens when you're an instructor and you want to make sure you have enough gear for everybody to get their stuff done. So kind of get ridiculous. I have all this in a little plastic container. It's got a little lid on it. I have all my extra SD cards in here, and then I also use these. So these are little like 10 micro SD card holders that you can get from Amazon. And they're typically, I don't know, $6, $7 a piece is what they used to run. And then I've labeled them, right? So I still need more. I've got a bunch more down here. So over time, you just end up with a pile. And then I went old school as to what's on them, right? So I actually have it written down what type of operating system it was, when the last time it was used, that kind of thing, how big the SD card is. So that if I'm looking for a particular SD card, I have a listing of, oh, you can't read that. Let me get closer. You have a reading like it's listed. Too much light, way too much light. Everything's getting washed out. There you go, like that, right? So those have, so I have all the numbers on there. So that's just how I organize it. Whatever works for you works. But you know, over time, I like this idea better than them all just kind of floating around in the bottom. Or like this where I've taped them. These are all from the last class that I did. So these have programming on it that I want to keep. So about once a quarter, I'll take those and put them on the computer, you know, fire up a Raspberry Pi with and put one in, copy the data onto a thumb drive, and then store all that together. So this is one way to do it. I'm sure there's lots of other better ways to do it. You will need an SD card reader. You only need one. You don't need all 20 of these things. And you'll need an SD card. So I'm just going to use this one here because it's still new in the package, hasn't been used. For your Raspberry, you will need power, right? And depending on how we're going to put this together, an Ethernet cable, possibly. You can use wireless to connect to your network. If you have a monitor available, right, then you definitely want to make sure that you have the right. If you're using a Pi 4, you'll need to make sure you have the right adapter here. This powers with a USB-C, which I have all in a box over to the left here, so I'm gonna have to grab that here in a second. But you'll need, to start with, we're gonna use just the reader and the SD card, okay? There is, and I think this is, this looks like a U1, right? So with the newer Raspberry Pis, you know, they've always suggested that you have a class 10 SD card, micro SD card. Katie just, I want to see, oh, that's awesome. So this is Katie, share this you shared it in the text, so put it on the document too. That's totally awesome. $9 for that? That's really nice. Anyways, sorry. they recommended class 10, but what we're seeing is that the U1 and the U3s work a whole lot better. And there's actually an app, a utility built into the operating system that you can test to see if your SD card is up to snuff, right? These are I think these are U1s. And this is one of those purchases that I make at Micro Center every time I go, right? So they have these are their generic versions they have at the front desk when you go to check out. And I usually buy 10 to 20 of them at a shot. They're like $3 and change for 16 gig versions of these. I think these are 32s, which maybe cost me $6 a piece or something like that. So I always have a bunch of these available. I keep a bunch extra, so if my students have a problem, break something, or their SD card goes bad, I let them borrow one for class, that kind of thing. And then I like to play, so I have, you saw I have 40 of them that already have operating systems on them. So be aware of that. There is actually, I think there's an article, I have an article shared. I'll find it and share it later on, in fact, I think on the parts list that I have for this class, I think I have the one that was recommended. I think it's by Tom's Hardware. And so if we go to the topics course or the materials list. So this one's, so WotC, so my IT instructor, then go to WotC, and then summer FDW CIS topics. The only thing I have out there right now is this materials list. In the silicon power, these cards, which are about $8 a piece. You can buy bigger packs of them, but this is the one that rated the best. I think Tom's Hardware did a thing, but it's been dated, and I know that there's newer, better, faster ones nowadays. But these have always worked really well for my students with very little to no problems. The biggest problem we have is them snapping the SD cards, which destroys the SD card. All right, so those are the things you need right this second. And then while we run the installation, we will grab the rest of the parts that we need to get the Raspberry up and running. So from the raspberrypi.com webpage, we're going to go to software here on the top menu, software. We're going to talk about this real quick, and then we'll get into the installation. What you could do to begin with, right, is this install the Pi Imager, Raspberry Pi Imager. So this is software that Raspberry Pi has made to image the SD cards. And it's really good, and it simplifies the process tremendously. Okay, so highly recommend you go this route. So you just simply download for Windows if you're on Windows, download for Mac, or if you're using a Linux desktop on an x86 machine, you can download it there too. You can do this on a Raspberry Pi, and you can actually install the imager on a Raspberry Pi and then image Raspberry Pi images from the Raspberry Pi. It's a really small program. So it's just an executable that we will install real quick. I'm gonna throw that off to the left. And then I want to talk about the operating systems, and then we'll come back to that program and do the installation. So Raspberry Pi, they created a Linux version that runs on the Raspberry Pi. And we're going to go look at the manual. So if you just manually install an operating system image, we're going to see all download options. So originally their operating system was called Raspbian, right? RASP for Raspberry, and then BIAN for the second half of Debian. It's a Debian variant, right? It's a Debian Linux variant designed by Raspberry Pi Foundation for the Raspberry Pi. Okay, it comes in a bunch of different flavors now. Okay, and now they don't call it Raspbian, they call it the Raspberry Pi OS. Okay, the first one, which is the recommended, the current desktop. Okay, the current desktop called Raspberry Pi OS. It comes in 3 different varieties. You got a desktop, a desktop with recommended software, and the light version, okay? How this works is the light version is no GUI, right? So it's just a Linux variant that has no graphical user interface. So it's really small, 297 megs. It runs nice and tight. So when you get to a final project and you want to eliminate all of the extra processing going on by having a GUI running in the background, you would install OS Lite and then run all your Python applications from there. We're not going to use that one today. You have the desktop version. Most likely, this is the one we're going to run. It's 837 megs. And the difference between desktop and desktop with recommended software is going to have LibreOffice installed.
Yeah, that would be one of them.
Yeah, it's a big one. And then it's got a couple other like IDEs that, you know, we may not need or we could easily add if we needed to.
Well, probably they took out Wolfram too, I'll bet, because that's a big chunk.
Yeah. So I don't know that, yeah, it probably doesn't. I don't remember seeing Wolfram on this one either. So it's going to take off a bunch of stuff. Like you can see, it goes from 2.2 gigs down to 837 megs. So we're going to use the desktop version. Okay, but we don't need to download it. Don't download it because then I'll show you what we're going to do later. But I just want you to be aware of these things. These were released April 4th. So these are relatively new. One of the things I do like to show my students is if you are going to do the downloads, right, you can show the hash and you can bring up a hash checker and download it and then show them how hash checking works and talk about hash checking and what the benefit of that is, right? So that's always it's pretty eye-opening for students that have never done that before. So it's pretty cool. The next piece they have is one thing I will point out, this new OS will run on all Raspberry Pis, all the way back to the first one. So that's one thing they were really big on, is they always wanted to make sure that they had an operating system that was backwards compatible. So this is a 32-bit operating system. It will run on all of the Pis, right? It won't run fast on the Pi 1 or even a Pi 2, but it'll run. They do have a 64-bit version. So starting with the Raspberry Pi 3B and everything newer, you can run a 64-bit version of the Raspberry Pi desktop. Okay, so and they've got the desktop and they've got the light. They don't have on this version, they don't have the recommended software as an option, but you can always add the recommended software after the fact. And now they have also legacy. So when they released this new version of the Raspberry Pi OS, this is one of the few missteps that I've seen them take, especially on the software side, but they removed support for the Pi camera, the Python Pi camera components, right? So anybody who had a Pi camera that was running a Pi camera program, a Python program, if they updated their OS to the new version, that stopped working. And they replaced it with like there's a camera library, like a standard basic camera library. But all of the existing code for the previous 9 years that was running Pi camera all of a sudden stopped functioning. So they released the Pi OS Legacy, which is the newest version, the newest kernel, but it has the older Pi camera software installed. Okay, they have come up with a new version of the Pi camera software, and they're implementing that, I think, in the next release, is my understanding. But you also can use the standard camera library that's part of Python to connect to the Pi camera. You can also use that library to connect to web cameras, and you can use CV, computer vision, to connect to web cameras as well. All right, so they've got a 32-bit version, a 64-bit version of, that's the newest, and then they've got the new version that's called Legacy that has Pi camera software built into it. And then they have the Pi desktop, which is based on Buster. It's not based on Bullseye. Right? I think these other ones are based on Bullseye, right? Oh, this is the legacy version is Buster. So they stayed with Buster, but up here is Bullseye, I believe. Yeah, Bullseye. Okay, so the newest version of Debian is the primary OS. Legacy is based on Buster. The Pi desktop is based on Buster. The Pi desktop is software that you can install and run on a laptop, a PC. You can actually install it on a Mac, right? You can, as long as it's the x86 version of a Mac. So you can take older Macs and you can turn them into Pi desktops. And then that would allow you then to connect to that Pi Zero that we showed you earlier from a PC, right? So you would just connect your Pi Zero with the USB cable to a Pi desktop, and you'd be able to access the pins from there. Here's the Mathematica. Right. So yeah, so it's still there. But I think they do absolutely remove it from this desktop here and leave it in on this one. Right? So those are the Raspberry Pi operating systems that are provided by Raspberry Pi, created by Raspberry Pi, maintained by Raspberry Pi. Okay. Not that one. They used to. Oh, they don't show them here. That's funny. There are other OSs that are provided, and we'll see them when we look at the imager. So we'll go through that in a minute, but we'll see them when we get to the imager. There are other images or other operating systems available through Raspberry Pi, okay, and supported. They're supported by the manufacturer of the OS, but they're and license is not the right word. They're just approved, right? They're just quote allowed, right? But they come as part of the imager, right? So if you see them in the imager, then Raspberry Pi is aware of them. I think Raspberry Pi is aware of all of them, but Raspberry Pi is aware of them and is okay with them being installed through the imager. Okay, and we'll take a look at that list in a minute. Actually, I can take a look at the list now that my install's done. If it runs, there it goes. So if I click on Choose OS, here's that first one, that 32-bit, right? Regular desktop. And then I can choose the light. I can choose the full. I can choose the 64-bit. I can choose the 64-bit light. I can choose the legacy, and I can choose the legacy light. Okay. Those are all the primary Raspberry Pi images. On the next section down, other general purpose images, right? So if you want to use Ubuntu instead, and if I'm mispronouncing it, please forgive me. You can install the desktop, the server. There's a couple of versions of server, depending on what Raspberry Pi you're running on. And then there's also core. Okay, so you can run Ubuntu on this. You can also Manjaro, ARM Linux can be done on here as well. There's also, how do you say that one? Apertus? Let's go with that, right? So this is actually a Debian image designed for embedded systems. I haven't played with any of these lately. And then you could actually install RISC OS, right? So these are all, again, not provided by Raspberry Pi, but built into their imager, right? So they're well-known images, trusted images, things like that. And so you don't have to run the Raspberry Pi OS. I tend to run the Raspberry Pi OS in my classes because it's really a straightforward, simple interface. The students get comfortable with it really quick. They really don't have to learn Linux in order to run it because it acts and behaves a lot like a Windows or Mac machine from a GUI standpoint. But you have all these options, right? So that are pretty cool. You also can install LibreELEC, OSMC, or Volumio, right? So these are going to be media players, right? So this one's a music player and a streamer. These are both media player OSs, right? So you can turn your Raspberry Pi into a media player for your TV. You also have the ability to do Recalbox, Laka, and RetroPie, which are all kind of retro emulation gaming. Those are all, again, these are all built into the imager. Right? We haven't even left the imager yet, and we're doing all these things. So, and then if you want to, I think 3D printing is, I think that's going to be Octopi. Yeah, so Octopi or OctoClipper, SimpliPi, right? So there's Octopi there. So if you want to run your 3D printer with a Raspberry Pi, there's 4 OSs there. If you want to run Home Assistant, which is, I want to try these ones. Right? Home Assistant here, Raspberry Matic, Gladys Assistant, and Homebridge, and then whatever this one is, NYMEA. Right. So if you wanted to set up a home automation system with the Raspberry Pi as the hub, you could do that. Home Assistant seems to be the most prevalent one out there right now. I think Homebridge is built on, I don't know who's the platform that does Homebridge. So it's a company's platform, right? I think it is. InfoBeamer, digital signage. So you got InfoBeamer. So this is actually, you can turn your Raspberry Pi into a digital sign that you can control. And then displays a full page browser on boot. So if you want to set up a kiosk, full page OS. And then there's a thin Linux, which is a Debian-based thin client that's also available. So all of those operating systems are there. And the reason I'm going through these operating systems again with you as instructors is there's a massive amount of operating systems that you could try, right? And you could, you don't have to use Raspberry Pi OS. If you wanted to have the students build a digital display board, right, as a project in a class, then you could use the digital display board, right? Or you want to have them set up a music streaming to see how that works, right? There's all these other things that you could do that are available to you, okay? For us, I think it's going to be safe for us just to pick. So if we go with the Raspberry Pi OS, then we eliminate using a camera this week. That's fine. We can do that. We can go without a camera. Raspberry Pi OS 32-bit. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your SD card. You're going to put your SD card in your card reader, and you're going to plug it into your computer. Windows just hates anything that's not Windows. Right here, I'm just picking my USB drive. It's a 16 gig, right? And then I'm going to click write. And what's going to happen is the imager is going to download the image and write the image all in one swoop. We don't have to download it ourselves, and you can. It's not a problem. But if you choose it this way and you click write, then it's going to download and install the operating system as we go, right? So we're going to leave that running in the background. I'm going to move it over to the side here. And I want to show you another resource while we're waiting for this imagery to finish. So right here, I'm already at 6%, 7%. So it goes pretty quick. So Raspberry Pi Wiki. This is on eLinux. I think I closed the, no, I didn't close it, it's right here. I am going to so I put that on the document, but this is I really like this wiki that they put together here, this RPI hub. There's lots of like buying guides. They actually have like the element 14 and RS components. We didn't even cover those two earlier today. So there's 2 more places for buying. So there's also a buyer's guide here that may give us some more input. Then you have the basic setup, how to do this, and then there's beginner's guides. So they got all kinds of really cool pieces of information. What I wanted to show you while we're installing the operating system is their list of OS distributions for the Raspberry Pi. And again, right, more just to kind of expose you to all of the options, right? But if you look on the right-hand side here, starting right here with Fedora Remix, these are all operating systems. There's 51 of them. Plus these 3 additionals. some announced ones that they haven't really verified yet, but there's 51 operating systems here that can be installed on the Raspberry Pi. Okay. I mean, you can do an entire semester just installing operating systems and checking them out, because there's so many to do. But you can go through and you can kind of click on. So I scroll down further down to where the actual article started, and you can kind of click on each one of these and kind of see what it does. I think these usually take you out to their webpage, I believe. Yeah. And then I don't know if this one has, yeah, the best desktop replacement is virtual desktop software on a Raspberry Pi. So I'm curious, right? Because I don't know how that works. I don't know if there's a cost. It looks like it's to try it now. So I'm sure there's a cost at some point. But to figure out what they're doing, you know, how are they using the Raspberry Pi in a thin client environment, right? That's kind of an interesting way to do that. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But I've seen V2 on the list forever, so I can't imagine that it's not functional. But that would be, you know, if you're talking about, you know, virtualization, cloud computing, then that would be an operating system that you could probably install and run, you know, in a lab environment to kind of show how desktop virtualization works. All right, Diet Pi, Arch Linux, Very Terminal. So this one's going to be a multi-boot program. Like I don't even know half of these. Like IP Fire, that's a really good one. Like if you want to build a firewall, IP Fire is like a firewall image. So you download it, install it, and you have a firewall. My students have used that in class multiple times and built really robust firewalls with inbound and outbound rules, content, not manipulation, but you know, content scanning, right? All kinds of good stuff. So IP Fire would be something like that. I don't even know what this one is. I2P Berry. That sounds interesting. Not there anymore. So their GitHub has gone away. I will point out that in that time frame, my card is ready. Okay. But there's, you know, there's 51 of them here. Let's say maybe, you know, 35 of them are still functional, still work, still something that you could possibly use. There may be something in here specific to what you're trying to do in class. I know that if you're like, there's PwnPy, and I know that there's a Kali Linux distribution as well. So there's 2 pen testing distributions that you can put on the Raspberry Pi to teach cybersecurity techniques. OpenSUSE is on there. OpenWRT, that makes it, again, that's another firewall. I thought at one point in time we had used, there's another digital, here's a Raspberry digital signage, there's a Raspberry kiosk. I think ThinBox is going to be a cloud or a, right, okay, so it's a thin client. Easy connection to Microsoft Windows-based servers. So you're using the Raspberry Pi as your end device to connect to a Windows desktop. That'd be a really inexpensive way to deploy thin clients, right? $35 instead of $200. Anyways, I wanted you to know about this. The website is stored in our web links reference page. But this is crazy good, right? There's lots and lots of things that you can try. And maybe something in here is one of your favorites. Maybe it's maybe there's a lab or an assignment that can be built around installing and configuring, like VPN, right? So that'd be a Debian edition. That's a VPN client, right? I know there's a couple more digital signage ones in there. I know we've used, can't remember which one we used. We used one. I had a student do a project, and they helped a local church put together a digital signage board system for their in their church. So pretty cool stuff. So this is all stored on eLinux the other thing they have is these, I'm trying to find it now. They have a list of hardware. Maybe it's, oh, this is the actual detailed of all of the models, right? So if you wanted to get into that, you could. I think one of the things that's neat about doing something like that is, right, you get students kind of comparing different pieces of hardware. Right? So in a hardware class, maybe I have them, hey, take a look at the difference between a Raspberry Pi 0 and a Raspberry Pi 3, right? And they can look at the difference in the processors and the speeds, maybe find an article about the differences between the processors and the speeds, about the different types of memory, right? So they can then start to gather, information and understanding about how these things work just based on the specifications of the particular units. I was looking for, there's actually a list of like hats that you can connect to and a bunch of other stuff like that. But this would be a good place to kind of go explore and discover new things about the Raspberry Pi that maybe you didn't know already. I can easily find, and I've been playing with them forever, so I can find something within 5-10 minutes that I've never heard of.
Can you install like a pfSense firewall on the Raspberry Pi?
I haven't. I think I had seen an article, but it's not one that's listed here. Like there may be a way to do it.
Okay.
I think you'll find like IP Fire. I don't know. I was impressed with IP Fire when we did it. Of course, I don't use pfSense, so I don't know if there's a difference. I would assume that pfSense is maybe a little bit more robust. But I think I'm trying to figure out. I don't remember. So I think we've had this question before. So it says no, but then there was something about the speed on a Raspberry Pi 4. So I think maybe somebody's been able to do it. Right. So
Gotcha.
in that case, I would definitely kind of look at the IP Fire software. That's
Okay.
yeah. So if you look up IP Fire. It's actually like an image, right? So it's already pre-built image. And I think once, I'm looking to see if they have, once you have it installed, it flips over to a GUI. So it makes it really nice and easy to deal with. So Raspberry Pi Model B, so there's an issue with hardware revision 4. Let's go. I wanted to see the web interface. Here you go. So it's got a web interface, right? So status, network services, firewalls, IP Fire logs. Kind of see real quickly, obviously, with the system menu, all the different things that are on the system menu. Right, so like I said, I think my take on it, I didn't do the work on it, the students did, but I felt like it was, I mean, look at that, that's pretty robust. So I think it would probably be a really good alternative, right, for pfSense.
Yep, I agree.
Right, Ipsec, Openvpn, dynamic DNS, time servers. You can actually mount external hard drives. So this is, I mean, this is as close to the ASUS router that I have in my house without being an ASUS router. It's really, like, you plug all kinds of stuff in. Like, it looks pretty good, right? So I would highly recommend that one, right? If you're gonna put together a firewall or have them do firewalls. I mean, every student, there's not a single student that we have that couldn't use a firewall like that, right? With a Raspberry Pi as the base, right? So instead of going and spending $300 like I did on a firewall or on a router, right? You could do this, right, and set this in front of your modem, and yeah, you'd have a pretty good, secure. I wouldn't say secure network because you never, right? You're only so secure as you can be, right? But I think that's a really good option from a learning standpoint. And that's kind of why I wanted to share this. Like, you can dig into these things. There's tons of information here. I think they've done a really good job kind of consolidating all this information. And just the list of OSs is ridiculous, right? I mean, it's just an amazing amount of operating systems that you can do. They even kind of go through how to do the setup and up and running. But we walked through the setup, right? We ran the setup in the background as we were goofing around. We just selected the OS, we told it where we want to put it, and we said go, right? And it did it and verified that it's working. So now I have an SD card that has that operating system on the SD card. All right. I'm going to move that off to the side. Was everybody else able to get that running? Are you still got anybody still working on getting that done? Anybody who's trying to get it done? Like, so if you're not working on it, that's I'm not worried about it, right? But if you did want to get an operating system up and running, do we need to do the operating system setup again to show you? Are you comfortable with that? Did you get it working? I don't.
You have to connect it to a monitor for this one, right?
No.
I think when it does the download, it doesn't create the user account and the password.
Right.
You probably have to do that, yeah.
Oh, you know what? Yeah. So good call. Okay. So now that we have this, like, so if we wanted to do this headless, right? To do this without a monitor, there used to be a pretty simple process to get.
Right. It's the
get
pain
it.
in the neck.
The problem is like you just said, is that there now is I thought somebody shared it in the chat. I think I missed it. Yeah, that's a really good point. Let's go back real quick to the news. And there you go, laser guided dog poop spotter. No. We get sidetracked so easy. And this makes me sad. The Atari is 45 years old. Of course. Yeah. You could put a Commodore 64 in it. I'm trying to find an article, sorry. There's an article. So when they came out with this new software, it used to be Pi and Raspberry used to be the default username and password, and now there is no default username and password, meaning you have to set it up in order to I'm just going to go look up headless. In order to actually connect to it remotely, like, so there's an extra step that we have to do. It's from 2020, 21. We're going to go Pi My Life up because they probably updated theirs. Enabling SSH, setting up networking. I'm just trying to see if they do networking there. Team viewer. I am not seeing. Uh-oh. So they haven't updated it since, because you have to. I thought you had to set a password ahead of time. I forgot about that. If you have a monitor, it's easy. You plug the monitor in and you're up and running. I'm trying to do this where we don't have a monitor. So the SSH in the boot file, that's pretty straightforward. What's missing though? I'm wondering.
Actually, I try to do that when it asks you to create a text file and
Mhm.
create a file SSH with no extension on it. So you can create it fine. As soon as you load it, it disappears.
Yeah, because it turns on SSH,
Right.
and then SSH is turned on from that point forward until you turn it back off. So it goes away on the first boot.
Correct.
That file does. What I'm missing here though is
The username and password are not there. So
Right.
even though SSH is enabled, you won't be able to get into it.
right. Yeah, that's what I know there's an
It should be the
article.
default use. It should be the user default Raspberry Pi.
No, they changed it.
Pi.
With the newest OS release in April, they changed it.
Oh, that's right.
Here we go. Nope. May 30th to the 20th. Here, Raspberry Pi docs, maybe. With the April release, they got rid of. And then they just conveniently don't tell us now. That's awesome. Okay, Raspberry Pi, April OS update, username. April 7th, here we go. So new wizard. So the Pi wizard introduced several years ago. So there's a Pi setup wizard that when you boot it to a screen, it will do the password setup there. However, if you're gonna use, here we go, headless setup. People who browse ahead, therefore you can work. Oh, it's in the imager. So we missed it. Okay, so if we go back over here, we may have to do our image again.
Yeah.
So choose that. I think if we go down to, is it miscellaneous? You should probably read the instructions instead of trying to figure that. Advanced options. So if you configure your image with a user account, and when the image is created, like in its first boot, it comes straight up in desktop one image. Click settings. Oh, settings. Settings. So we can automatically enable. Oh, this is awesome. Okay, I'm gonna redo my image. You can set the host name, right? So Raspberry Pi.local is normally the host name. You can enable SSH. Okay, password authentication is fine, and right here you can set the username and password. And so I'm just going to use the defaults that they took away from us for this. If you want to configure your LAN, your wireless LAN, you would click on here and do your LAN. And then you set your local settings, right? And then these are fine. So these are advanced options for this session only, right? You can, I would assume, to always use or this session only. So enable SSH, so you don't have to do the whole, put the boot file in the boot directory, and then set username, right? So you can set the username however you want to set the username. And then if you wanted to configure your wireless, you can configure wireless. I'm going to use a wired connection, and then you set your locale information. Okay, so this is going to do all of that.
Host name. You want to do the host name as well?
You can change it if you want. So right here, you can change it to whatever you want.
Okay.
Right. So let's just do. Let's see. 22. Okay, so that's going to be my host name. Right, and then you click save, and then we're going to do this one over again. So I'm going to do Raspberry Pi 32-bit, and I'm going to go. Oh, it ejected my card. It ejected when it was finished. So I got to unplug it and then do it over. Okay, so there we go. We're going to choose that same. I'm just going to rewrite right over the top of it. So they did give us the tools to fix it. We didn't know what we were doing. So I'm going to actually then save this out to So Raspberry Pi OS installation, April 2022. All right. All right, so that's in our document as well. And iMager's back here. We're writing at 21%. Somebody asked the question, can you skip verification? In the past, I always skip verification. With the Imager, I just let it go. But like when I was using Disk Imager and things like that, it just took forever. So I got rid of it. And I'm not gonna say I never had problems with the image, but rarely did I ever have an issue. It was a rare case where we weren't able to do something. All right. So I'm trying to, while we're waiting for this, I'm looking at the chat to see if there's. Cool. All right. So yeah, Tinkercad. That Tinkercad exercise is a good exercise. I thought a couple times about having them, go out and actually build it in Tinkercad first, like build one of the assignments in Tinkercad first, just so they get through the process of doing it virtually and then physically putting it together. I thought that was maybe a good idea. So I'm back to looking at the chat. I think Netiquette, I want to say September of 23 was the end of life for the Cisco IoT. It was in one of those one of the IPD weeks they did about a month or two ago. I want to say September is when the IoT fundamentals course and the data and the security course are going to go away. I'm sad. The security course, I think, is a really good security course. I really like that one. So I'm not sure how to replicate that. So that's kind of the reason why I was doing the cybersecurity labs in a couple of weeks, is just so we can kind of work through what to do instead. I don't know if there's a Pi emulator. The only place where we've kind of done Pi emulation stuff was inside of Packet Tracer, and I don't know, with the IoT classes going away, I don't know that the IoT devices will be in Packet Tracer any longer. Oh, and then somebody say there's an Azure one. Did that one get saved? Oh, that's the one we saved earlier. Okay. All right, so did the list. Cons, skipping the step. Okay, so I did, all right, so I'm done, right? I'm done, you can remove, continue. Okay, that piece is done. I'm gonna put the SD card in my Raspberry. I'm gonna plug in an Ethernet cable. All right, so you guys can see what I'm talking about. Here's all I've got. All right, so there's the Raspberry Pi, SD card, Ethernet cable. And I need to grab, I'm gonna take my headphones off because I need to grab a power adapter out of my box, which is just far enough away to rip the cables out of my computer. So give me like 30 seconds. All right. I've got 90% of my kit to fit in my Craftsman. It's like a toolbox dolly. Most of it fits. So I powered that on. You know what I'm also going to do? I can find it. So the other piece I'm going to use is that little thing we talked about earlier, the power button. So I plugged it in, and you can see that it's booting here. Anybody remember what I called it? Let's see. Dash. Okay. Faculty Development Week 22. That's what it's called. We need to find the IP address.
So this cable you have in there will give you both like power and connection to the monitor, or no?
No. So all I have right now, all I have is power
Okay.
and Ethernet. So no monitor is connected at this point.
Okay.
So what I want to do is
SSH.
I'll just ping to, well, it's a good SSH to it, right? SSH hi at, let me do it this way. Is that what I named it? I should have just left it. I think there's a V in here. No. Okay. I think I messed up because I can't remember now. I knew I was going to write it down and I didn't write it down. Faculty Development Week 22. So yeah, why is it? So I don't have the IP address. And did I close? I didn't close it. So did I leave this? It cleared it. No, it didn't. Let's see, FDW. So okay, 22. It should have found it without this. Why not? Let me make sure my cables are plugged. Okay, there.
Do you have a DNS setup already for this?
Yeah. So this right here should have found it, but it didn't find it. That's frustrating. We've run into this before. FDW 20. I did it for me. Does it want it to be capitals? It shouldn't. Windows shouldn't care. Doesn't mean it. That's technically what it should be, and it should have found that in the host file. So the other option, so I'm trying to do this. I'm trying to do this without a monitor, right? So that's because I think if you do this remotely with your students, right, there's a high likelihood that they won't have a monitor.
I think if you log into your Wi-Fi network, it will show you there's a new host with a new IP address.
Let's do this. We're going to try one other way. So advanced IP scanner. So this is a piece of software that you can download. It's pretty small. I'm going to see if it'll scan my current network and see that. see if I'm typing something in wrong, or if maybe it didn't. Because I've got a connection and I'm powered up. So it could, I mean, there could be something with my, yeah, so if I changed my IP address, or I changed my host name. So I'm going to run this. I'm not going to install it. Just going to run it. So I don't have to, I'm just curious to see if it'll pick up. So that's my router. My desktop, my wife's desktop, the printer, the Xbox. Like 12,000 Rokus. So Roku, TP-Link Raspberry. So there's one Raspberry there. But I think that Raspberry, if I'm not mistaken, I think that Raspberry is my Piware. Oh no, Piware is showing as 11. Yeah, so that's Piware. So the other Raspberry Pi is my flight tracking system. So the one that's showing up. So this one's actually not showing up, which means either my boot or I may have messed up my card, or I got something else going on. Let me restart.
I think I know the problem, because I tried the same thing, to put the username and password and everything else, and that information never gets saved.
It didn't show up, huh?
Yeah, it didn't show up. So if you plug it to a monitor, it's gonna ask you for a username and password.
Go through the username and password setup. I'm not like, it's not even showing up on my network though. That's what's kind of interesting to me, is that I've got it plugged in and I've got connectivity lights, but also, so this is curious for me too. So if I'm looking at from a troubleshooting standpoint, like, so if your students are trying to troubleshoot this, oops, wrong thing. Right here, I'm pointing, like, this is the red light and this is the green light, and the green light is just solid. Like, it's acting like it's not reading this properly. Wonder if there's an issue here. And this is where, as an instructor, having multiples of these to see if this is an SD card problem or something else. So I'm just going to shut that off, and I'm going to try. I have a Raspberry 3 here that we can try. I'm just curious now. Like, is this, because if I get the same behavior, that's a 2. So I get the same behavior, then I did, there's something wrong with the way the SD card was written. Does that make sense? So a lot of times in this case, if we're doing this remotely with a student, I would have them just re-image the file from scratch. So now I can see I saw a little bit of flashing there with the green. See, it's still saying solid, which is weird because that should just flash and then turn
Does
off.
that Ethernet connector have a traffic indicator on it? I think it does. That might help diagnose. On the bottom, there we go. Because I'm seeing solids. I'm not seeing any activity light.
Okay, so then I think there's some issue. And I'm wondering if it's by setting those settings, if there's something with the way it's booting, like it's not booting completely and waiting for us to do something. Does that make sense? because that, yeah, that's this indicator, this, and it's hard to see that with this lighting, but that indicator right there is staying green. And it shouldn't stay green, that second light. This first light is red, that's just showing us power. And so when I hate to,
Yeah, it's not reading the card if that's not blinking.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I think it gets,
Yeah.
it just gets to a point and it stops. Like, so it's not actually doing
I
what
don't
it's
think
supposed to do.
I don't think it saves that information. You know, that information is not saved.
Right, so,
Well, did you go back into this advanced options window? You've already saved it once,
I
right?
did, yeah.
Oh, okay. I was just making sure. I got to check
Oh,
all
no.
the basics, you know?
Oh, yeah, no, I completely agree. Like, I'm looking at going, why is it not? So I hit save, right? And then, you know, at that point.
Then
you
you
can just-
choose the operating system, right? So that means, where does it save it? It's supposed to choose the operating system first, then save it, or how that works? I mean, I
Well, it
think that
should. It should write it as part of the right, right? It shouldn't need to, the operating system is there, so I can get rid of that and just go pick a new one, right? So let me go back and just pick the same one over, choose the storage, that's the storage. Here's
Can
my
you just check
settings.
the file that it writes it to, just like you normally would write your own? You know, just writing a text file, it's probably all it does.
I
not
want to
sure how
say
gets
that
integrated with-
no,
This used to be done differently.
Yeah,
with the
this is
Pi, where you
different.
go into Raspberry configure and do the enable SSH and everything.
right. Well, you
Yeah.
could do the SSH with that file, right? So that file is
Right.
one of the
Yeah.
ways we did the SSH, but this is supposed to write that file, but I just booted, right? So I could, if we looked at the disk. So if we look at the disk itself, right? So here's the boot disk here, right? And there's not an SSH file there this time, right? So then if we were to go,
What
You
about the
had
config,
config
the
text,
fake
yeah.
text to see if the network settings are correct?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
That, right, because that's what I'm thinking. I don't know why they'd write a whole program. No, there's another file that has their the
There's
Wi-Fi settings.
HDMI.
oh, that's gonna be the, I don't
I
see
can't
that
remember
file,
which-
actually. Like, so it should have written that file, but it didn't. I don't
That's-
see that.
that
file
was
on
my
here.
thought.
Issue
yeah.
text is for that matter. Is that a diagnostic issue text down a little bit?
Can you
Where's
check
that
the
one?
CMD file? The CMD. That's not the file.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's like the link to the original GitHub that it's pulling the distros from, I'm guessing?
Looks like it. And then, yeah, so the WPA supplicant is the file that we were talking about, Katie,
Yeah.
right? And it's not there.
even there.
So I wonder, so I'm gonna do one other thing. I think, do I have SD card formatter? Yeah, I wonder if trying to rewrite that thing didn't really, seems like it would have just rewritten it, but. Oh, I need to get rid of this.
Oh, it uses the same file.
Yeah.
That's
Here
cute.
it is. And mess with that, close that down. I'm gonna leave that running over here. I'm gonna get rid of that. An update is available. Do you want to update? No, I don't want to update. Just format my drive. Format my E drive, which is the boot drive. I don't have any. So one thing I got to be real careful about. In the past, formatted an external hard drive. So by going too fast. Okay, so I have formatted this drive. So this drive should be right blank. So good, we're blank. And then let's bring up Pi Imager. And we want the tool to work. So it looks like you don't even get the settings until you choose an OS. And now we have settings. I'm going to leave it as Raspberry Pi. We're going to enable SSH and we're going to set the username.
Do you have to actually click to set the host name as well, though?
Yeah, you do.
Instead of-
You have
oh,
to
okay.
click here. It's
Okay, so it's-
automatically this. And then I'm just setting this as our default, the normal default. I'm not on a wireless network. And I'm not going to worry about locale settings. I'm not going to worry about those. I'm just going to try to, the only thing I'm really worried about is username and SSH. So I want to hit save on those. We're going to choose the storage, put it on the save rent, and then we're going to run that. Because what I'm looking for is, what we'll do is we'll eject it, we'll plug it back in, and we'll see if those files are there. Right? Because if those files aren't there, then it's not going to do what we think it's going to do. So there should, well, the WPA supplicant won't be there because we didn't change anything on the network configurations. I didn't change the name. I didn't change the wireless. So wireless is really the, because I'm not using wireless. Let's see if we can get that to one. And then again, this is doing this, we're doing this headless, right? And that's usually where, when the students are doing this, this is where you're going to run into the most amount of problems. You're going to have this same kind of issue, at least with one or two students minimum. If they have a monitor, like you say, if you have a monitor, you plug it in, it boots, you do your thing, and you're done, right? So that's a really easy solution to the problem, right? We don't have to do SSH. We can turn it on once we get booted, and then we'll remote connect. In fact, we won't even turn on SSH if we have access to the monitor. We actually just turn on VNC and then remotely connect with VNC. I'm glad I had the whole afternoon scheduled for this. I run into this kind of issue on day one. Headless is the only issue here. And I don't know, this is a new thing that the password thing is new because it wasn't like this before. Before it was always the default password, right? And obviously that's not a very good cyber security practice. So they corrected that, but it does cause us issues when we're trying to troubleshoot with students, especially on a remote basis. And I want to make it work headless because that's going to be the hardest way to put this together, right? Because if you write the disk and you put it on a Raspberry connected to a monitor, then you can see what's going on. And we wouldn't be worried about, we would know where it broke or what wasn't working or whatever, because it would give us an error. Then we can see the error and go from there. So 70%. So how many people have a Raspberry up and running so far that's tried, right? If you've tried to do a Raspberry, get a Raspberry running. I know there's at least one other that's having this, right? So Mike and Katie, it looks like. Heidi, awesome. Cool, cool. I'll be the last one. Almost there. No worries, no worries. No worries. Oh, Rick, it hasn't shown up yet? I pushed off to the end of the day. Ugh, that's frustrating. We had that happen. My wife, we had to have my daughter overnight something. We were on an RV trip. We had them overnight from UPS store to UPS store. Paid a god-awful amount of money to overnight this package. And it arrived in the new town on the day it was supposed to be delivered, and it never made it to the UPS store. So we had to stay an extra day, only to find out that they just held on to it. There was no reason, there was no excuse for it not getting delivered. So it's like, oh, are you kidding me? Luckily it was guaranteed, so we got our money back. That was still painful. Okay, so that's done. That's pretty quick. I mean, I'm gotta think it was, I removed the SD card reader. I'm gonna plug the SD card reader back in because we want to go look at the files. Like we should see an SSH file in this boot drive. And we don't see an SSH file in this boot drive. So that concerns me. That the imager, which it's the brand new imager, so it should have, yeah, so their stuff is not working the way it's supposed to work. It's interesting. So the config text, this is where we would set some HDMI stuff for VNC. Camera auto detect, display auto detect. Yeah, so there's nothing in there about, right, so we'd want an SSH file. But then we won't be able to log in because we don't have a username and password. So that makes it pretty difficult to connect headless. Right.
Earlier, I put a thing in the collaborator where VNC, there's already a built-in VNC connection, and you can use VNC Connect to do this as well. Because VNC's already been built into the Raspberry forever. They've actually put it in so that you don't have to, because when I configured this headless years ago, you had to connect it to a monitor in order to get it set up to connect it headless.
Right, yeah, which doesn't, that kind of defeats the purpose of headless, right?
Right. So VNC, I guess, worked with Raspberry Foundation and they put VNC into the Raspberry. And that might be a way we could get to it that way. Because apparently it's already preset to sync with VNC.
But it's not turned on.
Well, no, that's just it. It is turned on by default. That's what's weird, that what you're showing on the files there, I don't know that VNC would be covered in any of these files either. So I don't think that VNC would be there the way it's supposed to be.
But VNC is not covered by, is not turned on by default because that's the very first thing we do when we get on SSH is turn on VNC.
Right, it's not on by default.
It's not on by default. And now they've turned off the automated passwords, which, so they've actually.
Yeah, that's crazy. I
They've
understand the security of it, but that's crazy.
Right, especially when they give you, well, here's the first run SH. There's a script that was written today. So I'm gonna do this. I think that may be.
That's what I'm wondering, yeah.
I think that's the piece. I'm gonna close this. We're gonna try this boot. This is on a fresh, it's the same SD card, but I deleted off the previous installation. I'm wondering, I wonder if I have. It's weird. Oh, okay. So now I'm getting drive lights the way I'm supposed to get drive lights.
There we go.
So that's good. So here's what I'm talking about. Well, did I close? I did. I can't believe I did that. But I've got solid on my, I should probably plug it all the way in, that'd be good. So yeah, you can see my drive light, there's doing what we wanted to do, that's good. And
I'm sorry, it was VNC Connect
Okay.
specifically. Yeah, because that's their web-based headless access. You can access from anywhere in the world and all that stuff.
oh, nice, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm running that scan again. My indicator lights flashed on and off. But I'm not seeing activity, proper activity. There's the original Raspberry Pi. Here's one that doesn't have, right, we don't have anything here. So I'm wondering if that's it. So let's do this. So I think that's a new one. That looks new to me. I don't remember there being a blank before. So we're going to, well, yeah, we're going to try it. So SSH Pi at 172.17.69.1.216. Please.
Connection refused.
Yeah.
So that means that the username and password are not there.
Yeah, he's connecting, but it's connecting and then refusing the connection.
Didn't like my username. Yeah, so I don't, that's pretty, whoops. I'm not seeing, I think this is the only that's my Raspberry that I already know about. So this one, that one seems like my, so I'm wondering if we ping Raspberry Pi .local.
Well,
Is it a -4?
no, it's there. I mean, it's
No,
getting,
no,
you're getting replies, but
I know. 171. So 216 is something else.
oh,
So advanced is not finding it. Let's try SSH Pi at. Oh, there we go.
there we go.
I'll type the word yes. Okay. Okay, I'm in. Okay, so that, all right, so the setup works. I think, I'm wondering, I'm just trying to think through what could have caused the problem. Maybe because I already had an OS on there, there
Well,
was
it's
some
saying the
issue.
default password has not been changed.
No, because I said it. I said it
Oh,
exactly.
okay. Got
I
it.
said it that way on purpose.
Understood.
Because every time I try something different, I forget it. So, okay, so I'm connected. I'm just trying to think what went wrong on the configuration, right? So on this Pi imager, you have to select the OS before you get the setting. You set the settings. I'm wondering if because I put in a drive, it's supposed to wipe it out and start over. I don't know why that second run didn't work properly, but I went in and I used SD card formatter to wipe out the SD card and then ran the whole process from scratch and it worked the second time. And then the ping, right? So I used the ping, this command here, ping -4 Raspberry Pi.local, because I didn't change the name, right? So that's what I was looking for. This is fine if you only have one Raspberry Pi on your network, right? As soon as you have 2 or 3 or 4, then this starts to be a problem, and that's where renaming them is probably a smarter idea. And then we were able to find the IP address and then SSH to the IP address. Now that we're at the IP address, we want to do sudo raspi config. So this is all done. Like I don't have my computer. It's not connected to a monitor. It's just connected to the Ethernet and power. Right. So this is completely headless. If you had a monitor, right, you would plug in and you'd be able to do all of this stuff. You'd be able to boot into the GUI, and it would go through the configuration process with you, and you'd be able to get it all up and running. What I want to do is I'm going to go down to 3, which is the interface options. In the interface options, I can turn on VNC, right? So SSH already turned on. I want VNC turned on. So VNC is enabled. Thank you. And then for now, I'm going to go ahead and finish. All right. So now that I was able to log in with SSH, I use sudo raspi config to get into the configuration utility, and I turned on VNC. Right. So that allows me then to go to VNC and then type in the address 172.169.171. Is it? Yep. Log in. Oh, come on, Carrie. Type it in properly. And then I'm now connected, okay? So then this is my desktop running on my Raspberry Pi, but I'm connecting to it from my computer.
Carrie, may I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is Sarah. I'm on a Windows laptop, Mac laptop.
Mhm.
And when I do open terminal and I do the SSH command, I'm just getting like, not an error, but I don't know what you call it, like a rectangle is just showing there. Is there a step I'm missing?
Are you doing the pi at?
Yes.
All right, and are you using an IP address?
No.
Do we know the IP address?
Well, so I also have it connected to my other monitor, the Pi.
Okay.
So
So you can see the IP address if you just, whoops, it's hidden. It's hidden. Where'd it go?
yeah, so oh, go ahead.
Trying to find it.
It just wasn't clear in the sequence on, I thought I did SSH first and then,
Well, if you're seeing the monitor, so if you see the monitor, and are you just trying to turn on VNC? you
I don't
trying to just
understand this I
Okay,
don't understand this very well. I'm just trying to go headless for the first time.
no worries. Okay, so what you on your monitor, you see something like this.
Right, the one that's
Yeah.
connected separate, yeah.
Okay, so on this monitor, go to the Raspberry menu here. And we're going to go down to preferences. And we're going to go to Raspberry Pi configuration. We're going to take a look at a couple of things. So on the configuration, this is the configuration utility here, this little box. You're going to click on interfaces. And what we're looking for up here on the very top is this is SSH, right? And this is on, this is off.
Mhm.
Right? Is yours turned on?
Yeah.
On the SSH. Okay, so SSH is turned on. And then VNC, is VNC turned on?
Only because I just did it, yes.
Okay, all right, so that's good. The other thing is and you're logged in, right? So you're logged in and where did they put that now? Host is there, change the password, right? So there's a password. When you hit change password, I'm just curious to see if it doesn't tell you the current user. So, and you use Pi as your current user?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so then when you run the SSH from the command line, you say you're just getting the square box. You're not getting any kind of prompt. You're not getting like right here where on my machine where it was asking about the fingerprint, you're not getting any of that kind of stuff.
Correct.
That's weird. Do you have, right, and Mac should, yeah, so it should go from SS, it should go from the command line, so it shouldn't be a problem there. I'm trying to think through what else could possibly be causing the problem. Do you have Real VNC Viewer installed on your Mac?
I do not know.
Okay, so we try to solve both. We're trying to look at both of these issues. But go to if you go to a browser and you search VNC Viewer.
Yeah. So I mean, I did it through Spotlight, and it looks like I have it.
Okay. Okay, good. So I will, though, I'm going to continue this thought process so that everybody
Sorry.
sees it. No, it's not a problem. Not a problem. Not at all. I want to point this out because your students, I've had my students get confused about this. So this is the Real VNC Viewer download page, right? And you can see all these OSs, right? And mine is selected Windows, right? And it's selected Windows because I'm on a Windows machine. Okay. A lot of your students will pick the Raspberry Pi going, oh, I'm going to be connected to a Raspberry Pi. Let me do that, right? And it's going to try to give you, right, a Linux installation file. But if you're not on a Raspberry Pi, then that's not going to do it, right? So I wanted you to see this so that you can let your students know, hey, the viewer needs to be installed. Whoa. Needs to be installed. The version needs to be whatever computer you're connecting to the Raspberry Pi, not the Raspberry Pi version, right? So you on a Mac, you would select the Mac OS, and you would, obviously download the VNC viewer and install it. If you're on Linux, you can, I think there's a couple of varieties, right? There's other ones that have it, right? But a lot of your students will pick Raspberry Pi thinking that's right where we need, because we're connected to a Raspberry Pi, that's what I need to have there, okay? If you have VNC viewer connected, let's see if it'll connect you with VNC viewer. So if you open up VNC viewer, you would just put in your IP address. To find your IP address on your machine, if you highlight over the two arrows, are you using wireless?
No, I went wired actually.
Okay, so then if you just put your mouse over the two arrows up there in the top right, it'll show you the IP address for your computer.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can just type that into the VNC viewer. And let's see if you can get I'm just curious if you get this.
So I did that while you were talking about the download, and it timed out, so it didn't work.
Can you ping that device? Can you ping it?
Let's see, I think I tried.
Does the IP address look like it belongs on your network?
I don't know if I know the answer to that.
Okay, what are the first three numbers in your IP address?
So 192.168.
Okay, so
I mean, that was both numbers.
that's a normal home network number.
I'm just getting request timeout on the ping.
Okay, and you're obviously on your computer and you're connected to the Zoom call, right? So we know
Yeah,
your
right.
computer's on the network. Is your computer wireless?
Is my computer wireless? Yes.
And you're on a Mac, so do an if config. Is it if config? Yeah, do an if config. IFCONFIG at the command prompt.
Mm-hmm.
And then what are the first two numbers on that?
Well, there's a whole bunch. So what I'm looking for
Or
EN8.
You're looking for your, I guess, WLAN. So you should have a WLAN. Mine won't show you the same way, but like, so if I look at ipconfig /all, oops.
I usually just go up here and go to advanced.
Oh, I'm trying to run the command on my Raspberry. I am not. It's been a long day already. So I did if config on my Raspberry Pi. So I've got Ethernet, right? And this is my Ethernet adapter here. I don't have a WLAN, so I'm not doing WLAN. What I suspect is that your Raspberry Pi is on your Ethernet LAN, and your computer, your laptop is on wireless, and in your network, those two don't talk to each other.
Okay. I mean, honestly, my first question was just like what I expected to see. So I just was supposed to do the SSH, and then like you were showing me on your screen that what you see in
You should get
command
some
prompt.
kind of, you should get this, that, hey, this is a new device. You want a fingerprint, and you type the word yes. And then that's basically what it's doing, is it's keeping a copy of that hash on your local machine, so that the next time we connect, it knows that it's the same machine. And then it'll eventually just drop you to a DOS prompt, right? Or a command prompt here with Raspberry. So you can see I'm Pi at Raspberry Pi. This is, I'm no longer typing into my local computer. I am now actually,
Sure.
I have a secure connection to my Raspberry. And from there, I did that Raspberry config to turn on VNC, but you already turned on VNC, so you wouldn't have to do that.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Yes, no, maybe so. Everybody okay? That's attempting this, right? That's part of it. So we want to get, when you want to have a Raspberry Pi, we want to make sure you're connected to it on your network. I went headless this time. Obviously, we ran into a little bit of issue. We're able to solve the problems, not understand exactly what happened the first time. I think, right, just kind of an oddity. However, right, we can see here that I have, right, I'm remotely connected to my computer, right? So in this process, like from a system admin CIS training standpoint, right? So we're dealing with SD cards, we're dealing with writing an image to a disk, right? Once we've got the image to the disk, we're working on remote connectivity using SSH, configuration of an operating system by turning on VNC, and then connecting remotely with VNC, right? So 2 different ways for us to connect remotely to a system to be able to manage the system, right? So all of that CIS kind of topic is wrapped up in simply getting your Raspberry Pi up and running. If you do it headless, it's a little bit harder. I didn't connect mine to the wireless network, right? Which could be done using those settings at the very beginning. That would be one thing I would suggest, Sarah, is you could I'm trying to click on this. I never remember if it's right or left. It's the right mouse click. No, it's not left. So there's a way to, right? So you may want to consider connecting your Raspberry Pi to your wireless network to see that they're both on the same network. Your IP address will change, right? So I can turn on wireless. And then you may be able to, you'd probably be able to connect that way.
I'll try, thanks.
Yeah, and without knowing your network, it just sounds like your wireless and your wired network aren't bridging. They're not talking to each other. They both probably connect to the internet through the router, but the router's not letting those 2 talk to each other. But if you have the Raspberry on the same network as your desktop or laptop, whatever the case may be, then they should be able to communicate, and you should be able to SSH to the IP address that shows up here.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. So that would be one way. That's kind of how I would probably solve that issue. Okay. So then from a simple operating system standpoint, right? This is a Linux desktop. It's designed to run on the Raspberry Pi. It's a Debian variant. It has, similar things that you would see on a Windows or Mac OS. So you've got file manager. Make this a little bigger so I can see everything. I think I have a weird resolution thing going on because all of my title bar is stuck up underneath there somehow. Anyways, and for a Pi 4, I've got a really weird slow connection. I'm not sure what's going on. Maybe because I have too many other things going on on my computer. Close the window. It's got internet connectivity. So this is right. So this is a Chromium browser, web browser. If you are familiar with Linux and you want to install a different web browser, you're obviously welcome to do that. You're going to want to probably not get super robust versions, depending on the performance of your machine. All right. And then this is the version of the operating system that comes without, there's a lot of things missing on purpose so that we could get the installation done quickly. But you do have Genie and Thonny. The Thonny is the default Python IDE. It's meant for beginners, right? So if you like to use another IDE, right? So same kind of thing with the browser. You can install your own IDE if you would like. So those can be added at any point. Sound and video, there should be a VLC media player, right? So that, you know, if you have media on here, you can watch the media. If we create media with the camera, that kind of thing, you can do that. It's got typical utilities that you would find on most any computer. You know, image viewer, media player, under the accessories, you know, calculator, the file manager shows up again, a PDF viewer. There's an SD card copier, right? So what I do a lot of times when I'm setting up my workshops is I will set up one machine and I will do all the updates, and I will install all the software that we're going to use and put any files that are going to be needed for the workshop or class. And then once that's done, then I would use SD card copier, and I would plug the SD card reader into the Raspberry Pi and run the SD card copier, and it will actually create an exact ghost image. It'll actually image the machine onto the SD card, and I can take that and plug it into a different machine, right? And all of the applications and all the updates and everything I did would be there, right? So two reasons we talk about doing that is, one, for backup purposes. So if you have students, you know, in a lab working on Raspberry Pis, inevitably, right? So I have my student or my classes are capped at 24 because of the lab, but inevitably every semester, at least one and usually two students will break their SD card by some process, you know, trying to take that Raspberry Pi out of the case, or, you know, putting it in their pocket and not realizing it, and then sticking something like keys in there and then sitting down and cracking it. Something happens to their SD card. So recommend highly that they use the SD card copier with a second SD card, micro SD card, and they have a copy of this image, right? It's the same thing I do in our server classes. My server students will install virtual machines, and the very last task for the first chapter is, once you've done all the configurations that I've asked you for, and you've done all the updates, and you've done everything's set the way you want it to, then you have to make a snapshot. That's a requirement of that lab. So that at any point in time during the semester, if you mess up, we're not reinstalling from scratch. We just go back to your image. And then most students get the idea that, hey, after each lab is done and everything is working properly, I should snapshot, right? So they start to learn how system admin works. So they take backup copies. So I use the SD card copier for two reasons: deployment of SD cards, right, to multiple machines. I can get a lab of 20 Pi tops up and running using SD card copier, starting with one copy, right? From installation to having all 20 ready to go, it's a baseball game. So I just usually wait for the start of the baseball game, and then I start that process, and then you know, I can expand out to doing 4 copies at a time. And by the time the baseball game's over, I'm done, right? So combine things. Right, so task manager, terminal, text editor, like, these are all things that you're going to find in a normal operating system. And I point these out to our students so that they understand that, you know, because they, you know, a lot of them are concerned about Linux, right? And they're not familiar with Linux, but the way they built this thing is, it's really not hard to figure out the basic stuff. I'm curious, like I feel like I have performance issues right now, like I don't on my Raspberry. So I'm curious, this Raspberry Pi Diagnostics is a utility that will check the speed of your SD card. So I'm just curious kind of what, you know, I might, you know, is the read writes messed up, or is this maybe a communication thing, a network thing? Because it could be a network thing too. We've had lots of network issues lately. But I'm curious, right? So this is another way, you know, for us to to maybe do some performance assessment here. You know, is this particular SD card really not? And I passed, so that looks really good, right? So show log. Here's the pass. So if we look at the log, hopefully the log shows up. It'll give you an idea of what we're looking for, right? So it's right. So I got a sequential write speed of 18,783 kilobytes per second. The target was 10,000, right? So almost double. Random write. So I barely passed random writes. My target's 500. This is 559 IOPS is what I got on my random write. My random read was 1801. It's a little bit better than 1500. Right. So this card did pretty good, right? So it's not the card that's causing me this, whatever this performance issue is. And what I mean by that is like I just clicked and I'm waiting, right? So and I think that's just like things getting passed across my particular network. But again, another system admin kind of a thing that we can walk the students through as far as like, understanding what's going on with their machine, making a backup of their machine, getting things up and running. All right, there's there's help functions available as well. Right, there's a tutorial, and yeah, they got list out for references and all that kind of fun stuff. In the preferences section, we've already kind of seen the Raspberry Pi config. We'll go look at that again a little bit later, but in the preferences here, like appearances, main menu, mouse, printer settings, screen configuration. Wonder. This looks, the screen configuration is a relatively new component. It's usually not been. Oh, and this is just layout. I'm not worried about that. I think you can move things around now. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to go back to the menu. I want to look at two things in the preferences section. So the first thing we want to look at is that Raspberry Pi configuration utility. So in order for us to utilize some of the pins in certain ways on the Raspberry Pi, or make some configuration changes to the system in general, we need to run. I thought I ran it. Again, this may be just massive. It's really slow. This is not as slow as it normally should be. All right, so system, right? So we saw earlier we could change our password. We can change our host name here. Host name change would require a reboot. You can boot to the desktop, which is what we're going to do for this, or you can boot to CLI, so you remove the desktop from the equation. I have it set to auto login, and then there's a splash screen that pops at the very beginning. So it's not a big deal. We won't see the splash screens because, actually, we turn it off. We're not going to see the splash screen because we're connected to this remotely, and it's always going to be logged in or turned on by the time we get there. You can also set this up to boot from the network, so which we're not going to do right now. Under the display, oh, there's headless resolution, so that's good. So this is a new piece too. So the headless resolution. Hopefully we don't go too big. Interfaces. Okay, awesome. Looking at Sarah's. It's working. All right, so here, interfaces, SSH and DNC, we already talked about those. Those are remote connectivity tools that we're going to use. SPI and I2C, those are going to depend on if you're going to connect devices that need those two communications. They're serial communications. The serial port is turned off. That's interesting because that wasn't an option earlier. And then the serial console, though, was turned on. So you can actually, which we're going to do in the cybersecurity lab, you can actually wire into the pins on the GPIOs and connect to a serial terminal. connect to the terminal through serial connection. And then a couple other things that, depending on you, if you need them for devices, you would use those other ones. But the biggest ones for us, SSH and VNC. If you have played with a Raspberry Pi in the past, you notice the camera is no longer turned on or off. So that was one of the big changes, and that's the whole removing Pi camera and do these other things. You can also adjust the amount of memory used for GPU. You can set the fan, right? Fan temperatures. If you have a fan that's connected to the GPIO pins, you can actually power it from here. And then localization will simply be, you tell the computer what part of the world you are so that the clocks and everything turn on, because it's not 2341. Maybe in England it is. Let's find US, United States. So we're going to change the localization, right? I'm just going to leave everything else as normal. And then time zone, right? You need to set your time zone so that your clock will automatically set to the right place. It would be fun to be in Europe, but we're not in Europe. Click too fast. Oh, I don't need to do that either. Yeah, the delay is causing me pain. Daylight summer, right? MDT. I'll never get it right. I'm gonna click OK at this point, see if it lets me go. Didn't give me an option for. Usually it asks me to put timber in. Keyboards. So normally when you boot into, maybe if I restart and boot, it would have sent me through this process. But right now my layouts are English UK. So like the hashtag, what we would call the pound sign, would be the actual British pound sign. And then I think pipe ends up being something different. So make sure that your keyboards are set to English US. So what we've done in the configuration, right? I changed the display for the remote connectivity. I changed the localization components. Otherwise, I'm going to leave everything else as is for now. But again, the utility is real similar to utilities that you would see in Windows and or Mac, right? They're not exact, but they're close enough, right, for a student to be comfortable kind of working through those. So it's supposed to reboot, and I'm going to leave VNC here because it should come back to the screen, and hopefully, right? Hopefully it's resized properly. I'm still wondering what. You got all kinds of crazy stuff going on, so you close some things down. All right, so now, yeah, much better, right? So much better screen resolution. Oh, and look at the response rates. That's so much better. Good, okay. So, I know you guys think I'm crazy, but I could tell like it's not right. Now, the other thing, recommended software. Recommended software. So remember we did an installation, which was just the desktop. We didn't add any of the recommended software, okay? Here's all the stuff that you can use for recommended software. So we'll break it down by category. So SmartSim is a free open source digital logic circuit design package. I've never used it before. But if you want it, you just simply click on the checkbox there. Games. So there are, this Code the Classics is a book, and they put the book on the computer, and you can use Python to program kind of classic video games. I don't know, start, like Space Invaders and things like that. We can take a look at that in a minute. On the internet side, if you wanted to install Claws Mail, we already have VNC Viewer. Well, we don't have Viewer installed on the Raspberry Pi, but if you wanted to use this Raspberry Pi to view other VNC servers, right? Any other device that's running the VNC server, you could install VNC Viewer on the Raspberry Pi and connect to another machine as well. Okay. Office, LibreOffice, that's going to be the really big one. And I have my students install LibreOffice because a lot of their assignments, I want them to take a screenshot of the computer and then or of the screen here, and then I have them take those pictures and drop them into a document and then save the document as a PDF to submit. And if they have LibreOffice on their Raspberry, then they can use that to do all of that functionality, and they can log into the web and connect and submit their assignment right from the Raspberry. Otherwise, they've got to take screenshots or use their camera and then get the pictures, saved somewhere else, and then log into another computer and download and do all that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to avoid that step, but to get the installation done, to get people up and running, we don't install LibreOffice as part of the installation. At this point, you can click this and we can run it and it'll be done before we need it tomorrow. We won't really need it tomorrow. Raspberry 4K wallpapers, I don't have a 4K monitor, so I'm not worried about that. From a programming perspective, right? I know I saw Java show up a couple times. I am by no means a Java expert or programmer, but they have BlueJ and GreenFet, right? I believe one of them is the programming side of it, and one of them is the compiling side. Is that right? Something like that. I think they work in tandem, is my understanding. I could be mistaken. Mathematica. So somebody mentioned Mathematica and Wolfram earlier, right? So Mathematica is the Wolfram components, I believe. Moo, I'm going to go ahead and do Moo, because that could be MicroPython. So we're going to have that. I want to use that to connect to my Pico later in the week. If you use Node-RED, right, or want to use Node-RED to program, you can use, Node-RED is like it's a Node.js type of a variant, right? Something along those lines, or part of that, or it runs on Node.js. So if you've never seen it, it's pretty neat. We've done some labs in class for it, but it basically, you kind of flow chart your program, right? So, you have a flow chart, and if you have a decision to make, you can have two branches, and then, depending on what happens, it goes to, and basically just flow chart out your program. It's how I've always looked at it. So if you've ever played with Scratch, or you're going to do something with younger students, then Scratch is a really good way to do that. There's tons of tutorials out there. There's tons of really cool stuff. Yeah, Scratch 3 is the default now. So there's a bunch of really good stuff that you can do with that, especially if you're doing, I say play with the younger crowd, like we're playing with middle schooler or lower, right? Get them excited. And then the Synsat emulator, right? So this emulates that Synsat that we talked about earlier. I'm going to go ahead and throw that on just throw it on for fun. Sonic Pi. I've used Sonic Pi in the past, but Sonic Pi, if you are a musician or you like music or musically inclined, Sonic Pi is essentially programming music, right? So think like I want to say like house music at a nightclub kind of a thing, like where you have a DJ, right? And and you're not playing any like a popular song off of a record or a disc or whatever. You're kind of programming the sounds and music. And in fact, the guy who created Sonic Pi before COVID, that's what he would do. He would actually DJ using Sonic Pi and play house music in nightclubs and stuff like that for fun. But it's a really fun thing. Like you can program the drum beats and all kinds of other stuff to create music. And, so anybody, if you have a student that's like musically inclined, like creating music, right? It's one thing to listen to lots of music, but wanting to create music, that's a good way. I mean, it's a programming language, and they, they can program, and the end result is something that they're really into. So that's pretty cool. And then Visual Studio Code. You can put Visual Studio Code on these machines. Right. So all you have to do is select those things. There's also some universal access stuff, magnifier, screen reader, things like that. If you're in need of those, or somebody in your classroom is in need of those, they are available. And then all you do is click apply. And it will do the installation. I don't think there's any reboots. It may have a reboot. Let's see. And that's the operating system. Like, it's not overly complicated up here. We've now got updates are available, so we can click to install those. So I'm going to wait until these recommended software updates are done, and then after, because we're almost done today, but after class tonight, I'll go ahead and run the updates. There are Bluetooth. You can connect. I can connect my headphones and other things to the device, and then the networking settings are all up here. If you left click. You can set the Wi-Fi country in that point, but I don't. And then there's, where is it? Where'd it go? Here we go. Right mouse click is going to give you the menu, right? So you can see the wired and wireless settings. And then a left mouse click should give you the Wi-Fi. So if I just click the Wi-Fi country, if I set the Wi-Fi country, then it should find my network. And we're going to scroll all the way down. Sorry. Maybe. All these countries you want to go visit. Okay, so now that I've set that, you can see that here's all of the Wi-Fi in my area. And then I could connect to that just like I would with any other computer. So that kind of the idea of this last kind of 20 minutes is showing you all of these different things. It's just like the Raspberry Pi is a fully functional computer in this credit card size package, right? That, at worst, right, 85, well, retail price, $75 for the most expensive version of it. So installations are complete there. So I got Moo, my Sensat, my Visual Code Studio. I did not install, I didn't do LibreOffice. So that's why it was really quick. If you're going to do LibreOffice, just make sure you have a little bit of time. I'm going to close that. I'm going to run the installation up here, install updates. You can control your sound up here, and then off the edge of the screen here is the time. Okay, and the time is actually correct. All right. So that's the OS. So the Raspberry. So we reached my goal by the end of the day. I think we opened up a fire hose today. If we look at our little document here, like we already have 2 pages of web links for everybody to go. And if you have thoughts, if you want to, hit up either one of the parking lot and add questions or things there. You're welcome to drop them in there. And as I review tonight or first thing in the morning, if there's something that needs to be addressed or a topic that you want me to talk about or go over, then I can do that. So those are the places where you do it. If you just, on this one, if you just randomly grab one of these little tabbies, right, and just throw it out there, type in what you're interested in knowing, and we can kind of move things around as time permits. All right. If you have any websites that you know about or things that we didn't cover today that kind of fit in today's, or things that you think you want to share, you're welcome to add that to our website links reference page, which is in our Google Docs. Okay. So we've got Miro, which is kind of the collaborative, interactive, and then we've got the website links, which is it's still collaborative, but the idea is like we want to use it as a repository for all of these web links and everything that go in there. And then I'll review your top 3 things, from earlier, right? Network system admin, programming, robotics, VPN, DNS, and I will then construct the next couple of days of labs based on that feedback that you provided earlier today. All right. And I think I told you, like, we skipped breaks because we were troubleshooting and making things happen. So I apologize for not having breaks this afternoon. Obviously, if you need to get up and go. We were just, I guess working through stuff. So
Harry,
yeah,
as long as we've got the Net Academy people at the conference, maybe it'd be a good idea, like later on in the week, if they can pop in and let us know what their plans are.
okay, yeah, I'll ask
The
Jen to see if we
IoT?
can do that.
Yeah, because as long as they're here,
Right. Sounds like a plan. I will ask about it. Anything else? Any other questions? Any other comments? Awesome. All right. Well, we're 3 minutes early, so you're welcome to drop off. Have a great evening. I hope that you got something valuable out of today. I think, like I said, it opened up a fire hose. It was a lot of talking. Most of the rest of the time is going to be doing, right? There's just so much, this volume that we need to kind of have an understanding, and that'll set the stage going forward. So awesome. Excellent. Well, have a great evening, and we will meet again tomorrow and do this all over. Let's see, stop the share. I hope I recorded everything. I did. I'm going to stop the recording now.